Good evening, and welcome back to Haunted Tales. Tonight we journey into the ancient wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains, a place where legends are born and nightmares linger in the shadows. For centuries, these deep woods have been home to stories whispered by hunters, loggers, park rangers, and families who live in the hollows. Their accounts are not folklore alone, but chilling testimonies tied to missing person reports, police records, and eyewitness encounters that defy explanation. What you are about to hear are 10 of the most disturbing true stories ever documented in Appalachia. Stories that blur the line between wilderness and the unknown, where the silence of the forest conceals horrors older than memory itself. If you are new to Haunted Tales, be sure to subscribe and join our community of night travelers. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a descent into the darkness. Now steel yourself and follow me deep into the Appalachian shadows, where survival often depends on staying close to the light, because once you step too far, there may be no coming back. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Route 421, North Carolina. The road that cuts through the mountains of western North Carolina, Route 421, is a long, twisting stretch of asphalt that winds from Boone through Wilkesboro and out toward the Virginia line. To most, it is just another Appalachian highway, bordered by thick pine forests and endless rolling hills. But to locals and to the truckers who drive it at night, it carries a reputation as one of the most haunted roads in the South. Route 421 has claimed hundreds of lives over the years. In the 1950s and 60s, when the road was first expanded, its sharp curves and lack of guardrails made it notorious for accidents. Police records still list dozens of fatal crashes in which young drivers, often returning from late-night parties in Boone or Wilkesboro, lost control and never made it home. One particularly deadly curve near Deep Gap earned the grim nickname Slaughterhouse Bend after 4 teenagers died there in a single winter. Locals say their spirits never left. But the most persistent legend of Route 421 is not about crashes or mangled steel. It is about a girl, a young hitchhiker, seen most often on foggy nights, who appears at the side of the road with her thumb extended, waiting for a ride she never seems to finish. The first accounts, the earliest written record, dates back to 1965, when a Wilkes County Sheriff's deputy reported nearly hitting a girl in a pale dress standing on the shoulder at 2 in the morning. He swore that when he pulled over, lights flashing, there was no one there. For years, similar stories filtered in, mostly from long-haul truckers making the run through Boone at night. They described a girl no older than 20, with long, dark hair, dressed in what some swore looked like an old prom gown. She never waved, never ran, only stood silently, thumb extended, her pale face illuminated by headlights for just a moment before she vanished into the mist. In the 1970s, a Boone newspaper published a feature about the 421 hitchhiker. Several drivers came forward to share eerily similar encounters. One man, a trucker named Henry Collins, claimed that he actually picked her up. He said she climbed into his cab without a word, her skin ice cold to the touch. When he asked where she was headed, she replied softly, "Home." Collins swore he drove for nearly 10 miles with her in the passenger seat before he glanced away, just for a second. And when he looked back, the seat was empty. He never saw the door open. Local historians began connecting the story to a tragic accident from 1952. On a rainy night, a young couple was driving home from their wedding in Boone when their car lost control on a curve. The groom survived with minor injuries, but the bride was thrown from the vehicle and killed instantly. Her body was discovered along Route 421, her wedding gown soaked through with rain and blood. For decades, locals have whispered that the hitchhiker is her spirit, eternally trying to make her way back home. Witnesses often describe her clothing differently, sometimes a prom dress, sometimes a long white gown, but always pale, always silent, always gone before you can blink. In 1989, the Wilkes County Sheriff's Department received a chilling 911 call. A driver swore he had hit a young woman on Route 421 near Deep Gap. The man, panicked, told dispatchers that she stepped directly into the road. He insisted he felt the impact, that he saw her roll across the hood of his car before tumbling into the ditch. He was sobbing when deputies arrived minutes later, but when they searched the roadside, there was no one there. No body, no blood. Nothing. The shaken driver refused to travel that road at night ever again. The official report remains in the archives marked unresolved, no victim located. In 2003, a trucker named Alan McRae gave a sworn statement that he picked up the girl near Boone on a foggy night. He remembered her vividly, barefoot, hair plastered to her face from the mist, eyes downcast. He asked where she needed to go, and she whispered, "Wilkesboro." Alan drove her down the mountain, unnerved by her silence, but as he reached a straight stretch of road near the Yadkin River, she finally turned to look at him. Her eyes, he said, were completely black. He slammed the brakes, and in that instant, she was gone. The passenger seat belt was still buckled. The air was ice cold. Alan, a hardened trucker with 30 years on the road, never told his company what happened, but he shared his story with other drivers at a diner in Boone, and soon the legend of the 421 hitchhiker spread far beyond the county. Modern sightings, even today, sightings continue. In 2017, a college student from Appalachian State University posted on a paranormal forum about seeing a girl in a dirty white dress walking along the highway late at night. He pulled over, thinking she might be injured, but when he opened his car door, she vanished in the beam of his headlights. His post went viral, drawing responses from other students who claimed similar encounters on late-night drives through Deep Gap. In 2021, a woman on TikTok recorded herself driving down 421 near Boone when she suddenly gasped and swerved. In the frame, for just a split second, a pale figure could be seen standing at the shoulder. She later claimed she saw a young woman staring directly into her car window, but when she stopped, no one was there. Route 421 remains a dangerous road, despite decades of improvements. State records show more than 250 accidents between Boone and Wilkesboro in the last 10 years alone, many on the same stretches where the hitchhiker is most often seen. Locals say she is still out there, waiting for the right driver to finally take her home. And perhaps, late at night, when the fog rolls heavy through the Appalachian pines and the highway curves into darkness, she might step out from the tree line. A pale hand lifted, thumb extended, eyes that are too dark, too empty. A figure you'll never forget, if you're unlucky enough to see her at all. Unresolved ending. To this day, the Wilkes County Sheriff's Office continues to receive occasional calls about a woman walking along Route 421 dressed in white. Each time, deputies respond. The Screaming Tunnel of Route 16, West Virginia. The Appalachian region is full of forgotten roads and rusted bridges, but none have the reputation of Route 16 in southern West Virginia. Known to locals as the Screaming Tunnel, this stretch of road cuts through coal country, weaving through abandoned mining towns, collapsing barns, and hollow-eyed houses left behind when the coal dried up. By day, it feels desolate but ordinary. By night, it becomes something else entirely. Travelers, truckers, and even police officers have all reported the same bone-chilling phenomenon, a tunnel carved through the mountain near Fayette County that seems to come alive after dark. Drivers passing through at night describe screams, high-pitched, blood-curdling, and echoing, that rise up from the very stone. Some swear they've seen shadowy figures at the tunnel entrance. Others claim they've emerged on the far side only to find deep scratches running the length of their cars, as though something tried to claw its way inside while they were inside. To outsiders, these stories sound like folklore, but the history of Route 16 and of the tunnel itself paints a darker picture. The tunnel was built in the early 1900s, when the Norfolk and Western Railroad cut through the mountains to transport coal. For decades, miners used the adjoining road to walk home after their shifts. Locals still remember the smell, coal dust, wet stone, and the metallic tang of rail tracks. But the tunnel gained its cursed reputation in 1912. According to historical records, a fire broke out in a small shack near the entrance where a miner's family lived. His wife and young daughter were trapped inside. Witnesses claimed they heard the girl's screams echoing through the valley, carried on the mountain wind. By the time the flames died down, nothing was left but charred remains. Soon after, workers walking through the tunnel at night began hearing screams. At first, they believed it was memory, the echo of trauma still clinging to the coal-stained walls. But the screams persisted for decades, long after everyone who had witnessed the fire was dead. By the 1930s, the story had become a local legend. Parents warned children never to walk through the tunnel after dark. Miners carried talismans, crosses, lucky coins, to ward off whatever lingered in the stone. Folklore described the spirit as a young girl with hair singed away, her mouth blackened from smoke, her figure flickering like embers. If you walk through the tunnel at night, they said, you'd hear her first as a faint whimper, then as a piercing scream that clawed at your bones. Those who lingered too long sometimes emerged with burns on their skin, though no fire had touched them. One of the earliest documented encounters came in 1948, when Sheriff Earl Matthews responded to a report of a woman screaming on Route 16. Believing it to be an assault, he drove through the tunnel with his headlights blazing. He later testified in a local newspaper interview that the moment his car entered the darkness, his radio cut out. Static filled the speakers. Then he heard it, the scream. Matthews described it as a scream that didn't belong in this world. It was shrill, echoing, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. He stopped the car, pistol in hand, and shouted for anyone inside to come forward. But there was nothing, just stone, just darkness, just the scream that grew louder until, he said, it felt like needles stabbing into his ears. When he fled out the other side, he discovered deep scorch marks on the hood of his patrol car. The tunnel, he swore, had seared him without fire. Matthews never drove Route 16 again. In 1979, a trucker named Daniel Carter was hauling timber through the Appalachian backroads. His route took him down Route 16, where he was forced to pass through the screaming tunnel at midnight. Carter later described the experience in an interview for a regional magazine. He said the tunnel seemed unnaturally dark, swallowing his headlights. Halfway through, he heard what he thought was a woman's scream, faint at first, then so loud he thought she was inside his cab. His mirrors shook, his steering wheel vibrated, and his ears rang with the force of it. Panicked, Carter pressed the accelerator. His 18-wheeler roared out the far end of the tunnel. But when he stopped at a diner a few miles down the road, another driver pointed to his rig in horror. Long black scorch marks ran the length of the trailer, as if it had been the ghost lights of Brown Mountain, North Carolina. The Appalachian spine is filled with secrets, lost towns, abandoned mines, and shadows that move where no living thing should. But few mysteries are as famous or as chilling as the ghost lights of Brown Mountain. High above the Linville Gorge in North Carolina, Brown Mountain rises like a dark sentinel, its ridges cloaked in pine and fog. On clear nights, strange lights have been reported floating above its slopes, flickering and darting in ways no lantern or headlamp ever could. For centuries, locals have sworn these lights are the souls of the dead, wandering endlessly across the mountain. Scientists have tried to explain them away as swamp gas, headlights, or atmospheric reflection. Yet the stories persist, and the deeper you dig into the testimonies, the less scientific explanations seem to matter. Because the lights don't just appear, they follow, they beckon, and sometimes they terrify. The Cherokee were among the first to speak of the Brown Mountain lights. Tribal stories tell of a great battle fought centuries ago, when warriors fell in numbers too great to bury. At night, their spirits rise as glowing orbs, searching the ridges for their fallen brothers. These stories were recorded by European settlers as early as the 1700s, who themselves claimed to see wandering stars upon the ground. By the early 1900s, the lights had become a subject of fascination. In 1913, a report in the Charlotte Observer described hunters spotting dancing globes of fire hovering just above the treetops. Railway workers stationed in the gorge claimed they saw them almost nightly. Orange, white, and blue spheres gliding silently across the valley. The government even took notice. In 1922, the U.S. Geological Survey conducted an investigation. Their conclusion: the lights were nothing more than car headlights reflecting from distant roads, but locals scoffed. They insisted the lights had been there long before cars ever cut across the mountain. One of the most enduring local legends ties the lights to the story of a woman named Anna McDowell. In 1850, she vanished on the eve of her wedding. Her body was never found. Her fiancé swore he saw a lantern bobbing along the ridges for weeks afterward, as though she were searching for her way back. Soon others began reporting the same, a single light, swinging gently, appearing near Brown Mountain at night. Over time, Anna's light multiplied. Now dozens are seen at once, flaring and fading, like restless souls that refuse to be extinguished. In 1932, a hunter named James Harper gave sworn testimony to the Burke County Sheriff. Harper claimed he was stalking deer near the gorge when a glowing orb appeared less than 50 yards away. He thought it was another hunter with a lantern, but as he raised his rifle to signal, the light moved. Not walked, not swayed. It floated, rising vertically into the air. Harper froze. The orb hung motionless for nearly a minute, then darted sideways at an impossible speed, disappearing into the trees. Harper fled the mountain, leaving his gear behind. He told deputies he would never hunt there again. His testimony, recorded in county archives, remains one of the earliest official statements about the lights. Perhaps the most chilling event tied to the Brown Mountain lights occurred in 1960. A troop of Boy Scouts camping near the gorge reported seeing strange orbs hovering above the tree line. At first, the boys thought they were watching fireflies, but the lights grew larger, brighter, and closer. Several scouts later described how the orbs circled their camp, weaving silently between trees. One boy swore he felt heat radiating from a light that hovered inches from his face before it blinked out. Terrified, the troop leader rushed the boys out of the woods in the middle of the night. When they returned at dawn to collect their gear, they found the ground scorched in, perfect circles where the lights had hovered. The troop's story was dismissed as hysteria, but the blackened patches of earth remained for weeks. Over the decades, universities and independent researchers have tried to solve the mystery. Some suggest the lights are the result of natural gases seeping from the earth, igniting when exposed to oxygen. Others argue they are a rare atmospheric phenomenon known as earthquake lights, caused by tectonic stress releasing electrical energy. But none of these explanations account for the behavior witnesses describe. Lights that chase cars, hover inches from faces, or blink in rhythmic patterns like communication. In 1975, 2 fishermen on Lake James reported a terrifying encounter. While night fishing, they saw several orbs rise from the ridge and float across the water. At first, the men were entranced by the beauty, glowing spheres gliding silently over the lake. But as the orbs drew closer, the fishermen realized they weren't reflecting in the water. They weren't casting light at all. The orbs passed directly over their boat, filling the air with a low hum that made the men's teeth ache. Then, without warning, the lights shot upward into the night sky and vanished. Both men abandoned their nets and refused to return to Lake James after dark. Their testimony was published in the Morganton News Herald, fueling decades of speculation. In 1992, a college student named Rachel Whitaker disappeared while camping near Brown Mountain with friends. According to their statements, Rachel left the tent around midnight, saying she saw a strange light outside. Her friends thought she was playing a prank, but when she didn't return, they searched the woods with flashlights. They found nothing but silence, no footprints, no broken branches, no sign she had ever left the campsite. The only thing they reported seeing was a single glowing orb hovering near the tree line. Rachel was never found. Her case remains unsolved. With the rise of smartphones, videos of the Brown Mountain lights have circulated widely online. Dozens of clips show glowing orbs darting across the horizon, often blinking in patterns. Skeptics dismiss them as drones, headlights, or tricks of the camera. But seasoned locals insist no technology explains what happens when you're there in person. They describe the silence that falls before the lights appear, the way the air grows heavy, the sense of being watched from all directions at once. One woman compared it to standing at the edge of a crowd of people you cannot see, only feel. In 2011, a group of paranormal investigators set up thermal cameras and EMF meters on Brown Mountain. That night, they captured footage of several orbs hovering directly above them. The cursed mine of Caford Mountain, West Virginia. The Appalachian coal fields are graveyards disguised as mountains. Beneath the rolling ridges lie tunnels carved by generations of miners, some collapsed, some sealed, some abandoned so long ago that even their maps have been lost. But on Caford Mountain in West Virginia, there is one mine the locals refuse to speak of. They call it the Cursed Mine. Coal built Caford. Families lived and died by the rhythm of the shafts, and the mountain's black veins kept whole towns alive. But in 1924, disaster struck when a section of mine shaft collapsed without warning, burying more than 30 men alive. Rescue crews clawed through the rock for days, but the bodies were never recovered. The mine was sealed, the company shut down, and the site was left to rot. Yet in the years that followed, stories began to circulate, of voices echoing from the sealed entrance, of lamps glowing deep underground when no one was there, of screams that rolled up the hollows on still nights. Historical records from the Charleston Gazette describe the collapse in brutal detail. On November 12, 1924, at precisely 2:15 p.m., a section of shaft known as Number 5 gave way. Tons of rock thundered down, trapping the miners more than half a mile underground. Survivors at nearby stations reported hearing men screaming from behind walls of rubble. For 3 days, rescue crews drilled, dynamited, and shoveled, but every attempt only brought more cave-ins. On the 5th day, the company declared the rescue impossible. 32 men remained entombed in the mountain. Families gathered at the sealed entrance, sobbing as the last boards were nailed across the shaft. Some swore they still heard knocking from within. Others claimed the mountain itself groaned. Caford Mine was closed forever. By the 1930s, hunters and hikers began to report strange sounds near the sealed shaft. One man, a trapper named Bill Morgan, told neighbors he heard voices calling from the mine entrance at dusk. They weren't shouts, he said. They were desperate whispers, overlapping, begging for water, for air. Morgan refused to return to Caford, insisting the dead were still inside, clawing to get out. In 1941, 2 teenage boys camping on the mountain swore they saw lanterns glowing deep within the trees. When they followed the lights, they came to the collapsed entrance of the mine. They swore they heard picks striking stone and men coughing in the dark. The boys fled, leaving their gear behind. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a woman named Sarah Connolly, whose husband was among the men buried in the collapse. In 1953, nearly 30 years later, Sarah was walking near the mountain when she claimed to hear her husband's voice. According to her written statement in a local church record, the voice called her name 3 times, echoing from the ground beneath her feet. She described the sound as muffled, strained, but unmistakably his. Sarah fell to her knees and pressed her ear to the soil, weeping. She never returned to Caford. Neighbors said she believed her husband's spirit was still trapped, unable to rest. By the late 1960s, Caford's reputation had spread beyond West Virginia. A group of amateur paranormal investigators traveled from Ohio to spend the night. At the mine site, they pitched their tents near the collapsed shaft and set up tape recorders. For hours, the woods were silent. Then, sometime after midnight, the recorders picked up faint sounds, rhythmic knocking, followed by low moans. When the group listened back the next morning, one tape contained a chilling sequence. A man's voice, whispering, "Get us out." The investigators left the mountain immediately, abandoning their plans for further study. In October of 1977, a hunter named Paul Atkinson went missing near Caford. Search teams scoured the woods for days, eventually finding his rifle and pack at the mouth of the sealed mine. The boards covering the entrance had been pried apart. Atkinson's body was never found. Some searchers reported hearing footsteps in the tunnels when they called his name. Others swore they smelled coal smoke, though the mine had been coaled for half a century. His case remains unsolved. In the 1980s, a mining company attempted to reopen part of Cayford for exploratory drilling. They hired guards to keep trespassers away. One guard, who later gave an interview under condition of anonymity, described nights of terror. He claimed that every evening around 3 a.m., he would hear men singing old coal mining hymns from inside the shaft. Their voices rose in harmony, filling the hollow, but no one was there. Sometimes, he said, he saw lanterns flickering between the trees. On his final night, the guard swore he saw a figure emerge from the collapsed entrance. A man, covered in soot, helmet light glowing, his eyes empty sockets. The figure looked directly at him before vanishing into the ground. The guard quit the next morning. In 1995, 3 college students from Charleston decided to spend Halloween night camping at the Cayford mine. They brought beer, flashlights, and a Ouija board. According to their surviving testimonies, they set the board near the mine entrance and began asking questions. At first, nothing happened. Then the planchette spelled out a single word: help. Moments later, they heard scraping, the unmistakable sound of picks striking rock. Terrified, they fled into the woods. 2 students made it back to their car by dawn. The third, a young man named Eric Daniels, was missing for nearly 12 hours. When he stumbled out of the woods the next afternoon, he was incoherent, covered in coal dust. He claimed he had been led underground by voices. When pressed, he refused to explain further. He never spoke of the incident again. On March 12, 2006, a minor earthquake shook Cayford Mountain, though only registering 3.2 on the Richter scale. Witnesses reported something far stranger than trembling earth. Residents in nearby towns swore they heard screaming carried on the wind, hundreds of voices crying out at once. The phenomenon lasted less than a minute, but dozens of calls flooded the sheriff's office. Some claimed it sounded like the mountain itself was howling. Others compared it to a choir of men trapped beneath stone. Seismologists found no unusual readings beyond the quake itself, but locals remained convinced the dead miners cried out that night, their torment briefly breaking through. Today, the mine site remains abandoned, overgrown with weeds and brambles. The boards across the entrance are rotted, the air heavy with the stench of damp stone and rust. Hunters, hikers, and trespassers continue to report eerie encounters. In 2015, a pair of hikers posted online about hearing metallic clanging echoing from the mine at dusk. In 2019, a photographer claimed his camera malfunctioned repeatedly when aimed at the shaft, though it worked fine elsewhere. He later discovered faint silhouettes in his developed photos, men in mining helmets, their faces blurred, their bodies half buried in the earth. Folklorists believe the mine is cursed not just because of the collapse, but because of the way the dead were treated. The company sealed the shaft, leaving the men inside without proper burial. Their families were given no closure, their bodies left to rot beneath stone. In Appalachian tradition, spirits that are not laid to rest properly often linger, restless, seeking release. On Cayford Mountain, those restless souls may still be digging, still clawing, still screaming for daylight that will never come. If you stand at the mouth of the Cayford mine today, silence will surround you at first. But if you wait long enough, especially on cold November nights when the anniversary of the collapse returns, you may hear it. The faint tap of a pick, the low cough of a miner choking on dust, the whisper of a man begging for air. And if you listen too closely, you may not come back. Because on Cayford, the Witch of Red Hollow, Kentucky, deep in the Appalachian backwoods of eastern Kentucky, lies a narrow gulch known to locals as Red Hollow. It's a place where sunlight rarely reaches the forest floor, where the canopy grows so thick that even in summer the woods feel cold. Hunters avoid it, hikers detour around it, and families warn children never to stray there after dark. Because for more than a century, Red Hollow has been home to a legend whispered in fear, the Witch of Red Hollow. Her story is tangled in folklore and tragedy, with threads of truth woven through the myth. Some say she was a healer ostracized by the townsfolk. Others claim she was a murderer, banished from her village and left to rot in the woods. What remains certain is that people have gone missing in Red Hollow for as long as anyone can remember. And those who return often come back broken, whispering of a woman with hollow eyes and a voice that crawls inside your skull. The first records trace back to 1888, when a woman named Margaret Rains lived on the outskirts of a small settlement near Red Hollow. By all accounts, she was solitary, tending herbs and selling poultices to miners and farmers. But when a wave of sickness swept through the town, killing 12 children, suspicion fell on her. Neighbors swore they had seen Margaret, gathering strange plants at midnight, muttering incantations. Others claimed she kept jars of blood in her cabin. When the townsfolk confronted her, Margaret denied it all. But in a time of fear and superstition, denial meant nothing. One night, a mob dragged her from her home. Some stories say she was hanged from a sycamore tree at the edge of Red Hollow. Others insist she was burned alive. Either way, her body was never recovered. The townsfolk swore her final words cursed them. "I'll never leave these woods, and neither will you." Soon after, strange things began to happen in Red Hollow. In the spring of 1890, 2 boys wandered into the hollow hunting rabbits. They never returned. Searchers found their rifles near a creek bed, barrels bent as though twisted by enormous force. Their tracks ended abruptly in the mud, as if they had been lifted into the air. In 1897, a farmer's wife vanished while foraging herbs. Her basket was discovered beside a tree filled with wild garlic and roots, but her body was never found. That same year, whispers of Margaret Rains being seen in the woods spread like wildfire. Men swore they saw her pale figure watching them from the trees. Women claimed they heard her laughter in the wind. Children woke screaming from dreams of a woman standing at their bedside, smelling of smoke and damp earth. The legend of the Witch of Red Hollow was born. During the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps set up a small camp near Red Hollow to cut timber. Workers reported eerie events almost immediately. One logger, interviewed years later, described finding handprints burned into the bark of freshly cut logs, as though someone had pressed glowing coals against the wood. Another claimed he woke one night to see a woman crouched at the edge of his cot, her eyes black pits, her mouth stretching too wide as she whispered his name. The camp lasted only 3 months before the men abandoned it, refusing to enter the hollow again. Their supervisor recorded the official reason as morale issues. One of the darkest chapters of the Red Hollow legend unfolded in 1954, when the Carter family moved into an old farmhouse near the gulch. Locals warned them to stay away from the hollow, but the Carters dismissed the stories as superstition. Within weeks, neighbors reported strange activity at the farmhouse. Lights flickering at all hours, screams echoing from the woods at night. The Carters themselves began to withdraw from town, refusing to answer the door. Then, one October morning, a delivery man found the farmhouse abandoned. Inside, dishes were still on the table, chairs overturned. Upstairs, all 3 beds were empty, the sheets soaked with blood. On the walls, written in what looked like soot, were the words, "She is ours now." The Carter family was never found. In 1972, a hunter named Dale Brooks gave testimony to the county sheriff that he had been stalked in Red Hollow. According to his statement, he entered the woods at dawn and immediately felt watched. Hours later, while tracking deer, he heard a woman's voice whisper his name. Dale swore he spun around and saw a figure standing less than 10 feet away. A tall woman, hair tangled, face gray as ash, eyes like black holes. She opened her mouth, and he heard dozens of voices speaking at once, men, women, children, all screaming inside her throat. He fired his rifle in panic. When the smoke cleared, the woman was gone, but his bullet had struck a tree, and in the fresh wound, he swore he saw blood running like sap. Dale never returned to the woods. In the late 1990s, Red Hollow attracted the attention of thrill seekers. In 1998, 4 college students from Lexington decided to camp there as part of a Halloween dare. They brought cameras and tape recorders, determined to document the witch. Their recordings, later recovered by searchers, are among the most disturbing pieces of evidence tied to the hollow. At first, the tapes capture laughter, casual conversation, and the crackle of a fire. But after midnight, the mood shifts. One voice whispers, "Do you hear that?" On the tape, a faint female voice can be heard calling each camper's name, one by one. The students argue, frightened. Then the recording erupts with static and screams. The final minute contains only a single phrase, repeated in a guttural whisper. "Stay with me." 3 students were found wandering the woods the next day, clothes torn, eyes glazed. They had no memory of the night. The 4th student, a girl, named Ashley Weaver, was never found. In 2010, a professional paranormal team visited Red Hollow. They set up night vision cameras, EMF meters, and thermal scanners. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around 2:45 a.m., every device malfunctioned at once. The team later reviewed their footage. One camera captured a figure emerging from the tree line, tall, thin, with hair whipping in a wind that wasn't blowing. The figure moved toward the lens, eyes glowing faintly. Just before the feed cut to black, the figure smiled, showing teeth too long and too many. The investigators left Red Hollow the following morning. Their leader publicly vowed never to return. Even today, hunters, hikers, and the rare brave traveler report strange occurrences in Red Hollow. In 2017, a man claimed he saw a woman crouching on all fours at the edge of the road, her head cocked unnaturally, her fingers digging into the dirt. When his headlights passed over her, she crawled backward into the trees without ever breaking eye contact. In 2021, a group of teens filming a TikTok video in the hollow captured something chilling in the background, a pale face peering between 2 trees. The face seemed to follow them for several minutes before vanishing. The video went viral, reigniting fear of the Witch of Red Hollow. Folklorists believe the legend endures because Margaret Rains was denied a proper burial. Instead of being laid to rest, she was destroyed violently, her spirit trapped in the place of her death. Some say she feeds on those who enter the hollow, drawing them into her eternal loneliness. Others argue she is not Margaret at all, but something older that took her form, a thing born of the Appalachian wilderness itself, using her story as a mask. Whatever she is, Red Hollow remains cursed ground. If you ever find yourself in Kentucky, driving the winding mountain roads and passing the narrow gap where the trees grow too thick, you may feel compelled to stop. Perhaps curiosity will lead you down the faint trail into Red Hollow. If you do, the Children of Dead Man's Hollow, Pennsylvania. The Appalachian Range stretches far north into Pennsylvania, where old industrial scars and forgotten towns hide in the valleys. One such scar is Dead Man's Hollow, a wooded ravine along the Yoyogini River, not far from McKeesport. To hikers by day, it seems like a nature preserve reclaimed by the forest. But once the sun falls, the hollow becomes something else, a place that locals say belongs to the dead, especially the children. For more than a century, tales have swirled of disembodied laughter echoing through the hollow, of small pale figures glimpsed darting between the trees, and of travelers being lured deeper into the woods by voices that sound like children in distress. The stories trace back to both tragedy and cruelty rooted in the industrial past of Appalachia, when mills and quarries consumed both men and children with equal hunger. In the late 1800s, Dead Man's Hollow was home to a bustling industrial site, a glass factory, a quarry, and several small settlements for workers' families. Many of those workers were children, forced into dangerous labor to feed their families. Accidents were frequent, and death was common. Newspaper archives from 1892 record a collapse at the quarry that buried 6 boys alive. The factory itself caught fire in 1903, trapping workers, including at least a dozen children, inside. Their bodies were never recovered, and locals whispered that the fire burned so hot it consumed them entirely. By 1920, the site was abandoned. Families moved away, leaving the hollow to grow silent. But silence was never what followed. As early as the 1930s, hunters began reporting strange sounds in Dead Man's Hollow. One man, interviewed in a Pittsburgh paper in 1938, claimed he heard children laughing in the trees at dusk. When he followed the sound, he found tiny footprints in the mud leading toward the ruins of the glass factory. The prints ended abruptly at a stone wall. In 1949, two brothers hiking in the hollow swore they saw a group of children playing near the riverbank. But when they called out, the children stopped, turned in unison, and stared. Their eyes, the brothers said, were completely white. Then, one by one, the children stepped into the river and vanished beneath the surface without a ripple. One of the most chilling stories dates to 1962, when a young couple parked near the hollow on a summer evening. According to their testimony, as they sat talking in the car, they heard a lullaby drifting from the woods, soft, sweet, unmistakably sung by a child. The girl urged her boyfriend to investigate, thinking a child might be lost. But when they walked into the trees, the singing grew louder, surrounding them. Then, from the shadows, dozens of small voices began whispering their names. The couple fled, abandoning the car until morning. When they returned, they found the vehicle scratched as though by tiny fingernails, hundreds of marks etched into the paint. In 1977, a Boy Scout troop camped in Dead Man's Hollow during a weekend trip. The boys pitched their tents near the ruins of the old factory, laughing at the local ghost stories. That night, their scoutmaster awoke to find 3 of his boys missing. The search lasted until dawn. When the boys finally stumbled back into camp, they were barefoot, clothes torn, eyes glassy. They claimed they had followed the sound of children calling for help deeper into the hollow. The voices led them to a crumbling stone foundation, where they saw pale hands reaching up from the earth. One boy said he was pulled down until his friends yanked him free. His leg bore deep scratches, as though from small, desperate fingers. In 1984, a man hired to keep trespassers out of the quarry reported nightly disturbances. He claimed he would hear pebbles being thrown at his shack, accompanied by giggling. When he stepped outside, no one was there. One evening, he saw a small figure standing at the tree line. Thinking it was a local child, he approached. The figure turned and bolted into the woods. He gave chase, only to realize the child had no face, just smooth, pale skin stretched across where features should have been. The watchman quit the next morning. One of the most infamous cases tied to Dead Man's Hollow occurred in 1993, when a high school student named Jennifer Clark vanished while jogging on a trail near the hollow. Her friends reported hearing her scream, followed by what sounded like children laughing. Search teams scoured the area for weeks. They found Jennifer's shoe near the river, but no body. Several volunteers claimed they heard children calling for help in the woods during the search, though no children were reported missing at the time. To this day, Jennifer's case remains unsolved. In 2008, a local paranormal society staged an overnight investigation in Dead Man's Hollow. Armed with digital recorders and night vision cameras, they camped near the ruins. At 1:13 a.m., one investigator captured a clear EVP of a child's voice saying, "Come play with us." Another recorder picked up crying, faint but constant, as though dozens of children were weeping in the distance. The team later reviewed their video footage and found something even more disturbing. A group of small figures, no taller than 3 feet, standing in the background. Their faces were obscured, their bodies thin and gray. They stood perfectly still for several minutes before vanishing all at once. The group never released the full tapes publicly, claiming they were too disturbing. One recurring theme in all reports is the way the hollow seems to lure people deeper. Hikers describe hearing children crying for help or calling their names. Some claim the voices mimic people they know, a brother, a daughter, a lost friend. But those who follow the voices rarely return without incident. Some vanish entirely. Others come back disoriented, with hours or days missing from their memory. In 2015, a hiker was found wandering miles from the hollow, barefoot and muttering, "They just wanted to play." Even now, Dead Man's Hollow has no shortage of witnesses. In 2019, a woman walking her dog reported seeing a group of children holding hands in a circle among the trees. She called out, but the figures dissolved into mist. In 2022, a drone enthusiast flying over the hollow captured footage of the ruins. When he reviewed the video later, he noticed several small shapes darting between the trees. Too fast, too fluid for any living child. Folklorists argue that the child spirits of Dead Man's Hollow represent the tragedy of Appalachia's industrial era. Children were sacrificed to the mines, the factories, and the quarries. Their deaths, often unrecorded or dismissed, left wounds on the land. Without proper burials, without justice, their spirits remain bound. Others argue something darker is at play, that whatever inhabits the hollow only appears as children, that the voices, the laughter, and the pale figures are masks worn by something much older, using innocence as bait. If you walk the trails of Dead Man's Hollow by day, you'll see the ruins of industry. The Devil's Tree of Black Fork Hollow, West Virginia. The Appalachian Mountains are thick with hollows, narrow valleys where the sun struggles to reach the forest floor, where old logging roads vanish into tangled underbrush, and where silence can feel heavier than any sound. One such valley is Black Fork Hollow, tucked deep into the Monongahela National Forest of West Virginia. At its heart stands a massive oak tree that locals call the Devil's Tree. No one knows its true age. Some estimate it to be over 500 years old, its trunk gnarled and blackened as if scorched, though lightning has never struck it. For generations, locals have whispered that the tree is cursed, a place of sacrifice, a gathering site for witches, and a doorway to something far older than man. Those who enter Black Fork Hollow often feel drawn to the tree, even against their will. And those who touch its bark sometimes never leave the hollow at all. The earliest written account comes from 1794, when a frontiersman named Elijah McGraw recorded in his journal that he and his hunting party found a massive oak in the hollow. Around its base were dozens of animal bones, arranged in strange patterns. McGraw wrote that the tree reeked of brimstone, and his men refused to camp near it. That night they heard screams echoing from the hollow, though no people lived within miles. By the early 1800s, settlers avoided Black Fork entirely. Stories spread that a coven of women met at the tree under the full moon, performing rituals and binding spirits to the land. Others claimed the tree was a gallows, its thick limbs used to hang criminals and outcasts. Each tale ended with the same warning: those who touched the tree would be marked by the devil himself. One of the darkest stories tied to the Devil's Tree comes from 1856, when a man named Tobias Cole was accused of murdering a preacher's daughter. Though his guilt was never proven, a mob dragged him into Black Fork Hollow and hung him from the oak. Witnesses later claimed that as Tobias swung, he screamed that the devil would take vengeance on them all. Lightning split the sky, though the night was clear, and one by one the mob members died within a year. Accidents, disease, and unexplained fires consuming their homes. Locals said Tobias's body never decayed. For weeks it swung from the tree, eyes open, staring at anyone who passed. When the corpse finally vanished, only the rope remained, fused into the bark. During the Civil War, Confederate deserters were said to have used the hollow as a hiding place. Union scouts later reported finding their camp abandoned, supplies untouched, fire still smoldering. The men were gone. In the middle of the camp stood the oak. Carved into its trunk were dozens of names, each belonging to a missing soldier. Locals who visited the site swore they heard boots marching in the darkness, circling the tree. To this day, faint carvings remain visible, though the bark has grown thick over most of them. At the turn of the century, a logging company attempted to clear Black Fork Hollow. When workers approached the oak, their saws broke, their axes splintered, and their mules refused to move closer. One foreman, furious, struck the tree with his hatchet. The blade snapped, and the broken edge slashed his face. That night, he was found hanging from a low limb of the oak, his own belt wrapped around his neck. The company abandoned Black Fork within the week, declaring the hollow unprofitable. In 1937, a 12-year-old boy named Daniel Price wandered into the hollow with friends. Daring him, they told him to touch the Devil's Tree. Daniel laid his palm flat against the bark and immediately screamed. His friends said his hand blistered on contact, though the tree was cool to the touch for everyone else. Daniel's skin blackened as though burned, and he spent weeks in fever. When he recovered, he was never the same. He claimed the tree spoke to him in whispers at night, calling him back. At 17, Daniel vanished. His parents found his boots at the edge of the hollow, pointing inward. He was never seen again. 2 hunters from Elkins reported being stalked in Black Fork Hollow in the fall of 1969. As dusk settled, they heard heavy footsteps circling them. When they shone their flashlights, the beams caught pale figures, dozens of them, standing between the trees, motionless, staring. Terrified, the hunters fled, only to find themselves back at the base of the oak. No matter which direction they ran, they always returned to the tree. One hunter fired his rifle at the trunk. The report echoed, but the bullet hole closed before their eyes, the bark knitting shut. The figures moved closer. By dawn, the men stumbled out of the hollow, incoherent and shaking. They never hunted again. In the summer of 1988, 4 teenagers decided to prove their bravery by camping at the Devil's Tree. They built a fire and joked about the old legends, carving their initials into the bark. That night, one by one, they vanished from their tents. Only one boy survived, found wandering a logging road the next morning. He was barefoot, clothes torn, his chest and arms marked with deep scratches. He claimed that as his friends slept, The Crying Woman of Smoke Hole Canyon, West Virginia. There are places in Appalachia where the land itself feels haunted, not because of what people built there, but because of what they lost. Smoke Hole Canyon, a rugged gorge carved by the Mai. South Branch of the Potomac River in West Virginia is one such place. Today it is known for its dramatic cliffs and wild beauty, a destination for hikers and kayakers. But for locals who live near its borders, the canyon is something else entirely, a wound in the earth where sorrow takes shape. For more than a century, travelers have reported hearing a woman crying in the canyon at night. Sometimes the sound drifts from the cliffs, echoing down like a mourning dove. Other times it rises from the river itself, soft at first, then swelling until it drowns out everything else. Some have seen her, a pale woman in torn clothing, walking barefoot along the riverbank. Others swear she follows them through the woods, sobbing softly just behind their shoulder. They call her the Crying Woman of Smoke Hole. Her legend is rooted in tragedy, in fire, in betrayal, and in the kind of grief that never fades, even after death. The story traces back to the early 1800s, when settlers carved farms into the canyon. According to oral history, a young woman named Eleanor Harper lived with her husband in a small cabin near the river. The two had only been married a year when he left to fight in the War of 1812. Eleanor waited faithfully, tending the farm, keeping watch on the cliffs for his return, but he never came home. Some say he died in battle, others that he deserted her. What is certain is that one winter night, Eleanor's cabin caught fire. Neighbors tried to save her, but she refused to leave. She screamed her husband's name until the roof collapsed, killing her inside. Her body was never buried. The river carried her ashes away. Soon after, people claimed to hear her crying in the canyon at night, calling for the husband who never returned. The legend grew darker during the Civil War, when guerrilla fighters used Smoke Hole as a hideout. In 1863, Union troops raided the canyon, burning homesteads, suspected of aiding the Confederacy. A report in the Wheeling Intelligencer mentioned soldiers hearing a woman wailing most pitifully in the gorge as they set cabins ablaze. They searched for her, but found nothing. Locals later swore it was Eleanor Harper's spirit, mourning the flames that once consumed her. By then, the Crying Woman had become a fixture of local lore, a ghost born of betrayal, fire, and grief. In Nufo, 1911, a fisherman named Albert Klein gave a sworn statement to the Grant County Sheriff. He claimed that while casting his line in the river at dusk, he heard a woman sobbing behind him. When he turned, he saw a barefoot woman in a torn dress standing on the riverbank. Her hair hung in wet strands across her face. She lifted her head, and Albert saw that her eyes were empty sockets, black and dripping water. She whispered, "Have you seen him?" Albert ran, abandoning his gear. When he returned the next morning with friends, his fishing pole was still propped against the bank, but his tackle box was gone. In its place were small wet footprints, leading back into the river. In the summer of 1934, two families camped along the canyon. After dinner, they heard what they thought was a baby crying. Following the sound, they wandered down to the riverbank. There, they found no child, only a woman kneeling in the water, rocking back and forth, weeping into her hands. When one of the men approached, she lifted her head. Her mouth opened wider than any humans should, releasing a shriek so loud it sent birds exploding from the trees. The families fled, abandoning their camp. When they returned the next day, their tents had been shredded, as if by claws. Two hunters in 1957 reported one of the most terrifying encounters with the crying woman. As they tracked deer through the gorge, they noticed the forest had fallen, silent. Then came the crying, soft at first, then rising until it echoed through the trees. The men swore they saw a figure moving between the trunks, always just out of sight. One raised his rifle, but when he aimed, the figure vanished. Moments later, he felt a hand grip his shoulder from behind. Spinning, he saw no one. That night, the men camped on the cliffs. They woke to find the crying woman crouched at the edge of their firelight, watching them. Her face was blurred, as though water ran over her features. When they shouted, she dissolved into mist, but the crying continued all around them until dawn. In 1976, a group of teenagers drove into Smoke Hole Canyon for a midnight dare. They parked near the cliffs, daring each other to call out for the crying woman. When they shouted her name, the night went still. Then, from the river below, came a scream, not of anger, but of unimaginable grief. It rose so loud that the ground trembled. Panicked, the teens fled to their car, but when they started the engine, the headlights illuminated a figure standing directly in front of them, a woman soaked in water, her dress in tatters, her face pale and warped. She slammed her palms against the hood, leaving wet handprints that steamed in the cold air. The teens drove off, but when they stopped miles later, the handprints were still there, burned into the paint. In 1999, a hiker named Rebecca Mills. The Faceless Man of Greenbrier Gorge, West Virginia, deep in the wild tangle of Greenbrier County, lies a gorge the locals avoid after sundown. The place has no official name on maps, but to those who live nearby it is called Greenbrier Gorge. The gorge is steep and narrow, carved by a black stream that runs year-round, its banks choked with laurel and hemlock. Few dare to hike there after dark, because in Greenbrier Gorge, people whisper of a figure that moves between the trees. Tall, pale, and utterly faceless, they call him the Faceless Man. His legend is among the most unsettling in Appalachian lore. Unlike spirits who mourn or witches who curse, the Faceless Man has no history, no origin tied neatly to tragedy. He simply appears. Some claim he is a demon, others believe he is the ghost of someone erased from memory. But all who see him describe the same thing: a towering figure with smooth, pale skin where a face should be, standing silently in the woods until it moves toward you. The earliest stories of the Faceless Man trace back to the late 1800s, when logging crews worked the gorge. Men spoke of seeing a blank-faced fellow standing at the edge of their camps at night. One logger, in a letter to his family in 1889, described waking to see the figure crouched over him, head tilted as if studying his face. By the time he screamed, it was gone. Another account from 1897 tells of a boy who went missing while fetching water from the stream. His father found his bucket overturned on the bank, the boy's footprints circling wildly in the mud as if he had spun in terror. In the center of those prints was a set of larger ones, deep and bare, leading back into the woods. The boy was never seen again. During the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps built trails near the gorge. Several workers reported unnerving experiences. One man claimed he saw a faceless figure walking alongside him in the dark, matching his pace exactly, only disappearing when he lit a match. Another awoke to find his bunkmates gone. Searching the camp, he stumbled on them huddled by the fire, staring blankly into the trees. When he asked what they were doing, they all answered, in unison, "He wants a face." By morning, None of them remembered saying it. One of the most famous incidents tied to the faceless man occurred in 1952, when a group of school children on a field trip went missing in the gorge. Teachers claimed they had been playing near the Yager stream when a fog rolled in. When the mist cleared, 7 children were gone. Searchers combed the area for weeks, finding only a single shoe and a torn satchel. On a nearby tree, carved deep into the bark, were the words, "Give him your face." The missing children were never found. In the fall of 1971, a hunter named Gerald Price claimed he was stalked by the faceless man. According to his testimony, he shot a buck near the gorge and was dressing the kill when he felt someone watching him. Looking up, he saw a tall figure standing on the ridge, pale, blank, motionless. Gerald shouted, but the figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it began to descend the slope. Terrified, Gerald abandoned his kill and ran. He later told friends that as he fled, he heard footsteps behind him, impossibly fast, keeping pace without sound of breath. When he reached his truck, the figure stood only yards away. It lifted a hand, pointing at him. Gerald swore he heard a voice in his head whisper, "Yours." He drove off and never hunted again. 3 college students camping in Greenbrier Gorge in 1983 reported one of the most unsettling encounters. They claimed they woke in the night to find their tent unzipped. Standing just outside was a man-shaped silhouette. When they shone their flashlight, the beam revealed a tall, pale figure with no features at all. It crouched and pressed its blank face against the mesh of the tent, as if trying to peer inside. The students screamed, and the figure vanished. But in the morning, they found 3 sets of prints circling their camp, each print identical, in size, as if made by the same foot. In 1996, a young woman named Emily Rogers vanished while hiking alone in the gorge. Friends later found her journal hidden in her car. The final entry read, "The woods are too quiet. I keep thinking someone is walking behind me. I saw a man today, but his face was wrong. He has none. He wants mine. I can feel it." Her body was never found. Only her backpack turned up weeks later, lying at the base of the gorge. In 2007, a paranormal group entered Greenbrier Gorge with cameras and EMF readers. At 2:14 a.m., their footage captured something chilling, a tall figure standing among the trees. At first it looked like a trick of light. But as the cameraman zoomed in, the figure turned toward them. Its face was smooth and pale, reflecting the moonlight. The video ends abruptly as the camera falls. When the team regrouped outside the gorge, one member was missing. He was never seen again. The surviving footage remains one of the most debated pieces of evidence in Appalachian paranormal circles. In 2018, a solo hiker posted a terrifying account online. She claimed she had been exploring the gorge when she found herself lost. As dusk fell, she noticed someone walking parallel to her on the opposite ridge. At first she thought it was another hiker, but when she called out, the figure stopped, then turned its blank, smooth face toward her. She described the terror of realizing it had been following her for hours. That night she camped in a clearing, too exhausted to move. She woke to the sound of breathing just outside her tent. When she looked out, the faceless man crouched beside her campfire, tilting its head as if listening. By morning, it was gone. Folklorists and paranormal researchers disagree on the faceless man's nature. Some say he is the spirit of someone, forgotten, erased from history so completely that even his face was taken. Now he wanders, seeking new faces to replace what was stolen. Others suggest he is not human at all, but a manifestation of the gorge itself, a being that feeds on identity, wearing down those who see him until they are hollow like him. Witnesses often describe feeling drained, confused, or unable to recall their own names after encounters. Whatever he is, one theme repeats: he wants a face. If you ever find yourself in Greenbrier Gorge as night falls, you may notice the woods grow unnaturally still. The stream will seem louder, the air heavier. And if you are unlucky, you may glimpse him, a tall, pale figure standing motionless among the trees, watching. If you see him, do not look too long. Do not answer the voice that may whisper in your mind. And above all, do not let him touch you. Because, in Greenbrier Gorge, the faceless man still hunts, and he is always searching for a face to call his own. The hollow folk of Big Laurel Swamp, Kentucky, the deep hollows of eastern Kentucky have always been fertile ground for strange tales. None is stranger or more feared than the stories of Big Laurel Swamp, a stretch of boggy forest land where the hills dip low, the ground sinks underfoot, and fog lingers long after the sun has risen. Hunters avoid it, loggers refuse to cut it, and families who have lived nearby for generations warn their children never to wander there after dark. The reason is simple. Big Laurel Swamp is said to belong to the hollow folk. They are described as small, pale figures, no taller than a child but with long arms and hollow, echoing voices. Some say they are remnants of people who drowned in the swamp long ago, their souls trapped in the muck. Others claim they are something older, spirits of the land itself, birthed from water and rot. Whatever they are, those who meet the hollow folk seldom return unchanged. The earliest mentions of the hollow folk date back to the late 1700s, when pioneers pushed into the Kentucky hills. One journal from 1797 records a man describing tiny people with empty mouths that followed his party through the swamp at night. The settlers abandoned the route entirely, choosing to build their cabins miles away. By the mid-1800s, stories spread of travelers vanishing in Big Laurel. Families spoke of hearing faint voices calling from the bog, voices that always sounded like loved ones. But when the calls were followed, the searchers never returned. One of the oldest tragedies tied to the swamp occurred in 1849, when a farmer's 2 children wandered into Big Laurel chasing fireflies. Their father and neighbors searched through the night, guided by the sound of children laughing just ahead. By dawn, the searchers realized the laughter was not moving away. It was circling them. Hours later, the bodies of the children were found in shallow water, their faces twisted in terror. Witnesses swore that when they pulled the children free, tiny, pale hands let go of their ankles beneath the water. During the Civil War, deserters from both armies were said to hide in Big Laurel. In 1864, a Confederate officer recorded in his diary that he lost 3 men in the swamp. They reported being followed by small shapes in the fog, whispering in voices that mimicked their mothers and wives. When the officer investigated, he found the men's muskets abandoned, their footprints leading into a pool of dark water, and ending there. No bodies were ever recovered. By the 1890s, locals had tied the hollow folk to a reclusive woman rumored to be a witch. She lived on the swamp's edge, collecting herbs and bones. When children vanished, she was blamed, though no evidence was found. When the woman died in 1898, her cabin was burned. But the stories only grew worse. Some swore her spirit had joined the hollow folk, her voice now among theirs. Hikers reported hearing a woman singing lullabies from the fog, drawing them toward the water. In 1923, a hunter named Samuel Blake entered Big Laurel despite warnings. He never returned, but his journal was later found in the mud, its last entry chilling. The voices are close now. They sound like my boy, though he's home in bed. I see them in the mist, little pale things with hollow mouths. They want me to come closer. I don't think I can resist. Beside the journal were Samuel's boots, neatly placed as though he had stepped out of them willingly. In 1955, 5 teenagers dared each other to spend the night in Big Laurel Swamp. They camped on a dry rise, laughing at the old legends. By midnight, the laughter stopped. One boy claimed to see figures in the fog, circling their camp. The group heard whispers in their own voices, calling from the swamp. "Come out here, it's safe. Come with us." By morning, 2 of the boys were gone. The survivors swore. The missing had walked willingly into the fog, smiling blankly as if hypnotized. Their bodies were never recovered. In 1978, a nature photographer entered Big Laurel, hoping to capture the swamp's unique flora. His camera was found weeks later by searchers. Developed film revealed his final moments. The first photos show mist, trees, and water. Then, faint shapes appear in the fog, small, pale figures, blurred but unmistakable. In the final photo, one stands directly before the lens, mouth open in a perfect black circle, as though screaming silently. The photographer himself was never found. A group of amateur paranormal investigators camped in the swamp in 1992. That night, they captured hours of audio. On playback, beneath their own voices, faint whispers could be heard. "We are hollow. Be hollow too." At 3:12 a.m., their equipment recorded a scream. One of the team members, though she had no memory of crying out. By morning, all four investigators reported nightmares of being dragged into black water by dozens of small hands. They fled the swamp and refused to return. Perhaps the most infamous modern case occurred in 2006, when a hiker named Jessica Moore vanished in Big Laurel. Searchers found her tent undisturbed, her belongings intact, but her diary contained unsettling notes. "Voices in the night. They sound like my sister. But she's been dead for years. I know she's gone, but the voice is hers. They want me to come into the water. I think I might." Jessica was never found. 2 hunters reported seeing the hollow folk in 2017. They described small figures darting through the fog, their movements unnatural, almost insect-like. One hunter raised his rifle but lowered it when the figure spoke, in his late father's voice. As they retreated, they claimed the fog followed them, clinging to their clothes. For weeks afterward, they heard whispers whenever they were alone, faint echoes of their own voices repeating the words, "Be hollow." Folklorists argue the hollow folk represent drowned souls, bound to the swamp by tragic deaths. Their hollow mouths, always open, symbolize a scream that never ends. Others suggest they are elementals, not human at all, but creatures born of water and decay, mimicking voices to lure prey. Some locals believe the hollow folk can only exist where tragedy has soaked the ground. Each new death feeds them, swelling their numbers. In this telling, Big Laurel is not haunted by them. It is them. Big Laurel Swamp looks ordinary by day. Birds sing, sunlight glimmers on water, deer tread cautiously at its edges. But when dusk falls, the fog thickens. The air grows cold, and from the shadows you may hear it. A voice you know well, calling your name. If you answer, if you follow, you may see them. Small pale figures with hollow mouths, waiting in the mist. They will smile with borrowed voices, beckon with thin arms, and lead you into the black water. And once you step in, you will not come back, because the hollow folk are always hungry for more.